right. Hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Gretchen, and this is a workshop this is kind of the beta testing, if you will, because my grove mates have been pushing me to do something like this for a while. My background is landscape architecture, so I know a little bit about plants. It's not to say I'm a botanist or even a horticulturist, but I do have a good knowledge of how plants grow, of what they need to thrive, and the good, the bad, and the ugly about plants, because as landscape architects, when we're doing design with plants, you really need to know more than just, oh, that tree is pretty. So there is a kind of knowledge there, and several years ago, I was at a book expo, and I got this wonderful little book called Wicked Plants by Amy Stewart, and I highly recommend it. It's a really interesting read. If you have a significant other and you're reading it in bed, they are going to look at you funny and wonder if they pissed you off, because a good part of this book talks about poisons. But I would like to do as a disclaimer, this class is not how to poison your neighbor and get away with it. That's something entirely different.
Not even their dog.
Oh, darn.
Sorry, you know, it's more to basically develop a respect for the plant world. Now, plants are one of the kindreds, they're part of the land spirits, and most of the time we think of plants as benign or neutral. You know, you don't think of plants as being wicked. You don't think of them as having a temper. And maybe it's a little anthropomorphizing to say that they do, but in reality, the plant world has a lot of built-in defenses. And there's a lot of aspects to the plant world that can be dangerous. I know that when I go to a new place, like a state park or a national park, we see these posters that have pictures of different animals to beware of. Beware the mountain lion, and this is what you do. Beware this, and this is what you do. You rarely see, don't touch that. And they probably should. What I wanted to start today with is just a little bit about plants that you don't want to touch. And I was going to start with a plant that is one of my favorites, in fact, and grows locally here and grows through a lot of North America. And Rob was kind enough to bring this from his yard. You'll notice I'm wearing a very heavy glove. So this is a little plant, when left to its own devices, it will grow to be taller than me and equally wide, called Rosa rugosa, and that's the Latin name. It's also known as the beach rose, and it's very, very common in Cape Cod. You'll see this growing all over the place. And it is beautiful, beautiful green foliage. The flowers are these rich, vibrant pink, just exquisite aroma. And it's got beautiful rose hips. You can see there's one dry here that in the fall, it's just really stunning. It also is covered with very, very fine thorns, so closely growing together that they resemble fur. So you can kind of take a look at that. I would pass it around, but I really don't want anybody to get stabbed by it. Because one of the problems with these thorns is that the finer ones can break off and get stuck in your skin. And they can be very, very hard to get out. And it will burn. So this is what I have always referred to as my favorite attack shrub. If you've ever read recommendations, plant something with thorns in front of your front window to deter burglars, and people tend to go with barberry. That's a very common one. Oh, I'll plant barberry. Barberry's got nothing on this.
Also invasive.
It can be invasive. This is something that you really want to keep on top of with pruning. But the other good thing about this shrub is if you have an area like an embankment and you need to stabilize it and you want something that's going to grow and just take off, you can plant this and it'll just take off. It'll really fill in a space that it can handle very poor quality soil. It can handle really sterile soil. But this is an example of plants that we might consider wicked, a plant that misbehaves. There are other plants to be aware of. Giant hogweed is a plant that got a lot of attention in my area, right around here, a few years back. Giant hogweed resembles Queen Anne's lace, but it's like Queen Anne's lace on steroids. This is another plant that can get to be as tall as me. And they're trying to see if this actually has a picture. Nope, unfortunately not. But it can grow over 10 feet tall. I don't think I've ever heard of them that big, but I have heard 5 and 6 feet tall. And it looks like a giant Queen Anne's lace. And it's very attractive to children. Children are like, oh, this is so cool, and they go to pick it. But that sap, as soon as you break it, will cause instant blisters. And not only that, but it'll create phototoxicity that can linger for years. So if you get that sap on your skin, even years later after the original blisters are gone, you can get a recurrence of it as soon as you're exposed to sunlight. So something you definitely want to avoid. There's also, and that's something local. I'm trying to go with some of the more interesting ones, just because, you know, why go with just all the boring local stuff? We can get some really fun things. So there's another one called the stinging tree, and that's not local, and we're probably very happy that it's not. I'm just looking up that page real quick. So the stinging tree grows in rainforests, particularly in disturbed areas, in canyons, on slopes, and it's native to Australia. Not to say that you might not see it elsewhere, because people are bringing things in unusual places, but we're probably not going to run into it in our own backyard. But the horrible thing about the stinging tree is that, like the Rosa rugosa, it has these fine hairs. They almost resemble peach fuzz. And it's not just the stems, it's the leaves. Pretty much every part of this plant is covered in these hairs. And they have a neurotoxin that actually gets into your bloodstream. And it's very strong, it's very stable. It can remain active in a plant that's been dried. So if someone were to bring back, oh, I have a dried specimen, it's dried, it's dead, it's safe. No, this stuff doesn't break down. And people have gotten them in their eyes, people have inhaled it and had this in their lungs. It's pretty dangerous. Another related plant that's related to the stinging tree that you'll probably meet if you haven't already are nettles. I think everyone's almost everybody's encountered the rash you get with nettles. And something that I know from firsthand experience is that nettles, they have those fine hairs on the leaves, and they have the irritating oil that gets in your skin. It causes that raised bump and the itches. The stems have longer needles, and if you get hit with those, it'll actually cause whole patches of skin to raise up. You get these giant welts. They're very, very painful. And even after the pain has subsided, there'll be a lingering numbness. And I know this firsthand because I had it happen to me as a child. Oddly enough, one of the things that'll soothe it is the juice from the leaves. But of course, you don't want to then touch the leaves with your bare hands. You want to find an alternative way to extract the juice, and that can help soothe some of the pain. So, you know, again, we're talking about plants that don't necessarily play nice. And it's very easy to look at your garden as this wonderful little fairyland, but you get to think about what's in there. And I mean, even raspberry bushes, as you were mentioning before, you can walk past a raspberry bush and those long tendrils will not only hook on your clothing, they wrap around and they get stuck, and you can get those thorns stuck in you, and that's not pleasant. Now for the stuff that I know everyone really wanted to hear about. So, about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little longer, a friend of mine came back from Mexico with a bottle of absinthe, and he was all excited. And he said, you can't even get this in the States. You know, it's made with wormwood, which is a controlled substance. Like, wormwood's not a controlled substance. He goes, oh yeah, it is. And I said, no, do you have a few minutes? Let's go to Hewitt's, I'll get you some. Really, if you go to your average garden center, you are going to find an array of potential intoxicating plants and poisons. And that's why when people have small children or pets that are indiscriminate about what they nibble, you really have to think about what you put in your garden. Aconite, which is also called wolfsbane and monkshood, it's a beautiful plant. It's deadly. And there's really no other way to put it. It's absolutely deadly. Digitalis, where we get the heart medicine from, is also known as foxglove. Again, commonly found in gardens. And the wormwood that I was mentioning is also called lamb's ears. It's a variety of artemisia. And artemisias are becoming increasingly popular. You're going to see a lot of them. They're notable by their silver foliage, and they tend to be furry. And they are petable because they don't sting, they don't have thorns, they're very soft. But it is recommended that pregnant women or people who have, I would say, weaker systems, are more susceptible to things, shouldn't touch them with their bare hands, because some of the thujone that's in them can transmit through your skin. and into your system. But they are very edible, and the reason why they're becoming more popular is that deer tend not to like to eat them. And for those of you who may have been saying, how do I keep the deer out of my garden? What's the latest deer-resistant shrub? That's one of the plants that they're actually creating more and more cultivars of because the deer don't like them.
What is it again?
Artemisia is the genus. There's a whole variety. Some have more of the substance in them than others, but my recommendation is for women who are pregnant or who have small children, just don't use them at all, or don't touch them if you do. Let's go. Some other things that are pretty common that people may not necessarily realize have poisonous backgrounds are things that we actually do eat, but we eat them very carefully. So just going to the right page here. So how many people have ever had rhubarb? Pretty tasty. Do you know that the part of the rhubarb you're eating is the stalk? And you know not to eat the leaves. That's a very important thing. It seems like, well, if the stalk is good to eat, why can't I eat the leaves? Everyone says leafy greens are good for you. Not these.
It's like tomatoes.
Yeah.
You have to eat the fruit.
Yeah. It can cause, this is the way they describe it, the ingredient that is the problem in rhubarb is oxalic acid. And it causes weakness, difficulty breathing, gastrointestinal problems, even coma and death in rare circumstances. So yes, chances are you'll survive it, but do you really want to poison yourself? These are things to be aware of. Cashews are a really common nut. You see them in nut mixes. And I always laugh whenever I go to the grocery store and I see for sale raw cashews. I laugh because they're lying. You cannot sell raw cashews. Raw cashews would kill you. Raw cashews would cause blistering in your skin just to touch them. Cashews, it's interesting in this book, it says there's a reason why grocery stores don't sell raw cashew nuts. They actually lie. Cashews are in the same botanical family as poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac. Not something you'd want to. The nut is perfectly safe to consume, but if it comes in any contact with its own shell during the harvest, it will give the person who eats it a nasty rash. Cashews are always steamed open, making them partially cooked even if they appear to be raw. In 1982, a Little League team in Pennsylvania sold bags of cashew nuts that were imported. Half of the people who ate them developed rashes on their arms, groin, armpits, buttocks, because some of the bags of nuts contain pieces of the cashew shells. And realistically, this doesn't go into it, but if you eat enough raw cashews and you get enough of that internally, it can cause major internal problems. So, again, not something you want to eat. Another common thing, elderberry. Elderberry is a plant that I personally use a lot. I get it from health food stores because it really has a lot of immune boosting properties, and it does. It's a very, very good plant. However, it has to be cooked. Most parts of the plant, including the uncooked fruit, may contain different levels of cyanide. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about cyanide is also present in apple seeds. It's also present in the seeds of most stone fruits. So peaches, nectarines, plums. Yep.
Tapioca also.
Yes. That's another one that has to be cooked properly or, yeah. So these are things that we all eat, Red kidney beans. Red kidney beans are, again, perfectly safe and healthy, except raw or undercooked. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this word because it's way too many syllables. But there is a compound that's harmful, and it can cause severe nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. People usually recover quickly, but it only takes eating 4 or 5 raw beans to bring on very extreme symptoms.
And what was that? I couldn't hear you.
Kidney beans, red kidney beans.
Oh, kidney beans.
Yep. They have to be cooked.
Yeah.
Now, most of us, when we cook with kidney beans, I think the majority of people get them canned, and they're cooked in the can. So you're pretty safe getting canned. If you're using raw ones and you're soaking them, you need to make sure they're thoroughly cooked. And, it's just again, these are things that are good that we all eat, just can be a problem. So let's see here. Go through some other interesting ones. Oh, intoxicating plants. This is always a fun part. Well, the truth is, people have been distilling various sugars from various sources for a very, very long time. So you can make basically alcohol from almost anything that has a sugar or starch base. It's, you know, when you're talking about quality and how good it tastes and how strong it is, it depends on what sugars you start with and how far you go with the distillation process. This is a description of a well-stocked bar. The provisions of a well-stocked bar include everyday crops like grapes, potatoes, corn, barley, and rye. But sometimes alcoholic beverages include more interesting plant ingredients. Vin Mariani was a potent brew of cocoa leaves and red wine. It was very popular in the 19th century. Laudanum, I think some people might remember if you've ever read anything about Lord Byron. He and his friends were known to drink that like wine, which was, it was a medicine made of alcohol and opium, and it was also tipped into brandy for an addictive cocktail. There was another fermented barley drink called kaikion that could cause psychoactive episodes, and the ancient Greeks indulged in that. Yep. There was also some things that were brewed from ergo-infected rye, and basically it was like the earliest version of LSD. So ergo is an interesting one, and I'll just kind of segue into that for a moment. It's actually a fungus, it's not a plant, but it hides in the rye plant, looks just like the rye plant, gets seeded with it, and it is, it is a very dangerous substance. And a lot of people suffered from ergo poisonings. There's belief that a lot of the witch crazes and things like that were started because people were infected with ergo. And certainly there was a class distinction there because you were more likely to be exposed to ergo if you were of the lower classes. The higher classes, at a certain point in time, started refining their flour more, and they were using more wheat and less rye, so they were less likely to be affected. So you tended to see the hysterias breaking out more within the lower classes, not to say that the upper classes didn't take advantage of it. Because if you have people that are scared and panicky, you can manipulate them far more easily. And I mentioned absinthe. Absinthe is sometimes called the green fairy. What's interesting about absinthe is that many people, including my friend, who was all excited about getting some, think it's the thujone that makes it so special. And the truth is it's not. The way absinthe is made, there's so little thujone left in it by the time it's gone through the distillation process. Really, the wormwood is primarily a flavoring. So it's really just the incredibly high alcohol content of it that is getting people high, not the thujone. However, it doesn't mean that, you know, wormwood and its relatives can't be dangerous. You know, you do have to be aware of them. Mescal and tequila, made from the flowers of the agave plant, whose sharp thorns and highly irritating sap are so forbidding that jailers planted them around Alcatraz to discourage escape attempts. Frankly, I think they could have planted this too. I don't think they had to go to that. But the plants are actually not cacti, although they look like it. They're in the agave family, and they're actually more closely related to hostas and yuccas. And they're closely related also to the spider plant. The worm in mescal is the larva of a moth or weevil that feeds on the plant. So the people who've had tequila and are like, oh, eat the worm. Yeah, that's where it comes from. I don't think most of them have worms in them. I think Anymore?
I remember the worms.
You probably have to pay extra for the worms now.
Yeah.
You're like nodding, yeah, worms are extra. This is interesting. I'm always afraid when I'm pronouncing things, I'm going to pronounce it terribly. But zubraka is a traditional Polish vodka flavored with a blade of bison grass, also called sweetgrass or holy grass.
Can you hear?
The grass is native to both Europe and North America, and Native Americans have used it for basketry, incense, and medicine. It is a natural source of the blood thinner coumarin. So blood thinner in it, not such a good idea. Something to be kind of careful.
Best vodka you'll ever drink, though.
I don't doubt it. May wine, I think a lot of people will see that in stories. I've often seen references to May wine, and I never knew what it was until I read this. It's a popular German drink made from steeping the leaves of the ground cover sweet woodruff in white wine, giving it a sweet grassy flavor. Ingesting the plant at high doses could bring on dizziness, paralysis, and even coma or death.
I should remember that for next year. I gave him a one last year. I
I made it, just soaking it for a little while.
Yeah,
A little bit, just for
the flavor.
a little more like for the cultural thing of it.
Okay.
But, you don't leave it sitting in there for weeks like you would with a tincture or something. That would make you sick.
They say that recipes for homemade May wine recommend picking young leaves in the spring before the plant blooms, and then using them very sparingly.
Yeah.
In the U.S., the plant is not considered a safe food additive, except as a flavoring for alcohol, which is interesting. No, it's not safe for anything else, but sure, you can put some in your alcohol, that's okay, which I find very interesting.
There's a lot of plants though that come up, and if you get them early in the spring, you're okay. But as soon as the spring goes by, they're not good for you anymore.
Well, and that's true too. It's also something to be aware of with a lot of plants, that the chemicals in the plants change over the life cycle of the plant. And I think that that's true of perennials and woody plants, but especially of annuals, because their life cycle is over 1 year. And how they go through that life cycle chemically is very significant. I mean, if you think about an analogy like a human being, we're born, hormones change and evolve, spiking at puberty and then change again as we get older. These annual plants are going through a plant version of the same cycle, and they're doing it in the course of 1 year. So sometimes a plant can be safe this week, and by next week it's not safe. And I mean, if you're an herbalist, I know you are, you've learned when it's safe to go after something, when it's safe to harvest something, when's the right time to do it, when's the wrong time to do it. But that takes a lot of in-depth knowledge, and I highly recommend that if you're interested in learning that, you talk to someone who has been trained by someone else who really knows what they're doing. Don't rely on a field guide, because you can get the field guide to edible plants of North America, but especially if you're talking about medicinals, because I said, like with digitalis, yes, we get a medicine out of that, but it can also stop your heart. So unless you really know what you're doing, you could do something really bad without meaning to. Here's an interesting one. You were saying about the other vodka. There's a cannabis vodka from the Czech Republic. And basically what they say is they take a handful of the cannabis seeds and they just stick it in the bottle, and you'll see them floating in. The manufacturers assure drinkers that it contains nothing but alcohol to get you high, and that it doesn't taste like bong water. There's an anise-flavored Italian liqueur, Sambuca, that's also made from elderberries. And again, they contain cyanide in their raw form, but when they're used in the vodka, and the Sambuca, it's not really a problem. I would fear the hangover, but.
So if you make elderberry wine, say.
Yes.
You'd
Cook them.
puree them or something, and then.
Not puree them. You want to boil them or blanch them. You want to cook them.
You
want
can
to
dry
raise
Say, how
them
do you
if
get
you
the
just
liquid out of the
dry
berries?
them.
If you just dry them, it's
Yeah,
okay?
because you could, like, if Mountain Rose Herbs, the herb company that everybody orders from.
Okay.
They sell you dried elderberries.
Okay.
And once they're dried and completely dried, they
Okay.
shrink all up.
Yeah.
Then they're not poisonous anymore, because I've been making
Oh, okay.
tinctures and
Okay.
cordials with them for years.
Well,
Okay.
And they're actually
because
really
we have
good for
elderberry
you.
plants.
But
Oh,
that's-
you do? Okay.
Lots of them.
Red berries or red berries are never eat the red berries. It's
Yeah,
only
they're
the blue
the
and
black
purple ones.
wild ones.
Well, they're, when I say red, I mean, they've got red in them. They're very, very dark,
Okay.
like black almost.
Yeah, then
Yeah.
They're
those
commercial
should be-
ones. They were
Yeah,
planted
Oh,
for
okay.
those should
commercial.
be.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, European ones are red, I thought.
But so, if you were gonna make a wine, you'd need to like boil it up first to
Yeah.
make your liquid. I'd say, how do you make a liquid out of these berries are this big? You know?
Well, it's basically, I don't know if you've ever made a jam or you've ever made like a
Oh,
pie
those.
filling or a compote, you cook it on the stove with sugar and
Yeah.
water,
Right.
and that would cook them down. So if you're cooking them down,
Yeah.
you should be okay, but don't munch on them raw. That'd be a bad
It's good
idea.
to know that, because I have.
Oh, have you ever had any ill effects from it?
But I don't eat many of them, because they're bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Oh.
have tasted, I've tasted everything.
Bitter is nature's way of saying, don't eat me.
Well,
I was
exactly.
gonna say, to an extent, that's true, but there are exceptions, there are
Some of us
things.
like bitter.
There are things that are sweet. And there's, for example, yew. Every part of the yew plant is poisonous, with the exception of the aril around the seed. The red part is actually not poisonous in and of itself. But because it contains something inside it that's very poisonous, that's the problem. And the aril is sweet to the taste.
Yeah. As a kid, I used to eat them, but I never ate the seed inside.
Very
Which
good.
is a good
We're,
idea.
we're very glad that
That's
you're
why
still
we're
here.
talking. That's why you're talking.
Yeah.
I'm staying away from yews.
And I always, when I was a kid, I didn't realize, but I've learned as a grown-up and herbalist,
Mhm.
that never judge a plant to be non-poisonous because birds and animals
Oh, yeah.
eat it.
Yes.
Because they have special ways they can digest things that
Mhm.
doesn't bother them, but it kill you, you know?
Exactly, especially certain animals. Pigs in particular, I know they have more enzymes than we do, so they break things down very differently. They can digest things safely that would kill us, absolutely. And even if you look at animals that maybe genetically could handle something, I remember someone saying, well, my dog can eat roadkill because the coyote eats roadkill. No, no. While your dog and the coyote may be very closely related, and why that coyote may even have some dog DNA in it, its digestive system from puppyhood has been brought up to be able to handle these things. And it is an interesting thing, is that human beings, we're actually little ecosystems. And this is something that even mainstream medicine is starting to realize. We have an entire ecosystem just in our gut alone. I mean, millions of organisms that are not human organisms, but that we depend on. And they are organisms that not only help our digestion, they maintain our immune system, and they do protect us from toxins from foods. Yes?
Side note, with directly to that.
Yeah.
A rather horrible little disease humans get is C. diff. It's a lower intestine disease,
Okay.
where basically what you have to do is bacterial infection, you have to knock it out with strong antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, you lose every single bacteria you had in your intestines. And they're finding that the best way to treat this is a fecal transplant.
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they're actually working on
Fecal
basically
capsules.
taking dried feces, putting it in pill form, and treating it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty disgusting, but that's,
Talk about a new way of saying eat shit.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, God, no, Karen. You can't sell it.
So yes, there's a lot of plants out there that we encounter every day. Oleander doesn't really grow much around here, but it does further south in the US, and that's highly poisonous. Rob, I think you were pointing out at one point that the honey from rhododendron flowers is poisonous.
Yeah, I think it's either that or the eucalyptus can't be poisonous, it's just full, basically.
Yeah, no, rhododendrons and azaleas, it is poisonous, and likewise with oleander. In fact, many of the broadleaf evergreens have poisonous aspects to them, but, you know, how often are you going to eat them? You know, that's the thing, but you might eat the honey. Now, if you have wildflower honey and there's a small amount that the bees gathered, you're probably going to be fine. But if you have a hive that's surrounded by oleander and rhododendrons, I would leave that hive's honey alone. Just a good,
At least when it's in the flow for that plant.
Mhm.
yeah.
Probably something.
So there's also some other shrubs. I think I mentioned foxglove here. Oh, I've got them there, but thank you. I want to use a little more. See if there's any that I didn't already mention elsewhere. Daphne. Daphne is a plant that It's not grown as much anymore because it's become much more fickle in terms of its quality as an ornamental plant, at least around here. But it's a small broadleaf evergreen. It's very pretty, and it has very pretty berries that will kill you very dead. They're popular for their tiny clusters of intensely fragrant flowers in winter and early spring when little else is in bloom. Just 1 or 2 sprigs of it will perfume an entire room. The sap can be irritating to the skin, and every part of the plant is poisonous. Just a few brightly colored berries would kill a child. And those who survive may suffer from lingering irritation of the throat, internal bleeding, weakness, and long-term vomiting. So again, it's something that when you have children, you need to be thinking about this. And don't trust the garden centers. I mean, I hate to say this because I don't want to put down a whole group of professionals, but most garden centers, they know the ornamental aspects of the plant. They don't really know a lot about it. When you're going to plant a garden and you have a list of plants that you'd like, do a little research. You know, start on the internet. I would highly recommend this book, not just because it's an interesting read and gives you good information, but it has an exceptional bibliography in the back. And really, just do your homework. If you are somebody that doesn't have to worry about that, you don't have small children coming, you're not worried about your pets eating it, still just use a little common sense. When in doubt, wear gardening gloves. You know, be conscious that these are living things that have their own protective mechanisms, and you need to respect that. And that's really what this is about, is that all of these plants, they evolved in certain ways, and we may not be aware of all the little intricacies with which they live their lives and how they could impact us negatively, in some cases very negatively. We had talked about black locust earlier, not in the workshop, but earlier this weekend. And black locust is a very tenacious tree. It can be very pretty. It has beautiful white flowers in the spring. It also has some really significant thorns, like the thorns can be 3-4 inches long, and they can cover the entire tree. You don't often see the thorns on the trunk. You usually see them on the smaller branches and the branchlets and near the flowers and leaves, but they're pretty rough. And it's another one where all parts of the plant are toxic. The toxic called robin is similar to ricin and abrin, which is produced by castor beans, rosary peas, respectively. It's a milder version of the poison, but it can cause a weak pulse, upset stomach, headache, coldness of the extremities, and the bark is most especially toxic in the fall. Again, that's when the toxins are concentrating there. And this brings me to the rosary pea and the castor bean. So rosary peas, I wish I had the ability to bring all handouts. I had wanted to, it just time didn't allow it. It's a really beautiful looking pea. I just want to look up and see if I can find the page. It's not as impressive when you see it in black and white, but yeah, this drawing is not particularly impressive. But it's a beautiful red, and it's got this little black dot, and they were used for beading. The reason why it was called the rosary pea is because they made rosaries out of them. And they made a lot of beaded jewelry. And that was fine, except if you pricked your finger when you were putting, oh, there we go. Rob has a picture of it. Yeah, really pretty looking. Very hard. It's not something that I think most people would say, oh, well, eat me a few of those. But in the beading industry, if people pricked their finger and then got some of that in, not a good scene. Where was it? The poison at work is abrin, which is similar to ricin again, which is found in castor beans. It attaches itself to the cell membranes and prevents the cells from making protein, which kills them. It can take a few hours or even a few days for symptoms to appear, but when they do, the unfortunate victim will be beset by nausea, vomiting, cramps, disorientation, convulsions, liver failure, and after a few days, death. Unfortunately, the colorful seeds are attractive to small children. An Indian doctor warned, the rosary pea will kiss a child to death. And they were very, very common in jewelry making at one point in time. And even inhaling the dust from it could put you at risk. I mean, it was very easy to accidentally be exposed. Not something that I think most people would see. It's native to tropical Africa and Asia, and it has been since naturalized in many tropical and subtropical areas of the world. I don't know that it's commonly found anywhere in the US, although in some gardens it could be. So.
With that search I just did,
Mhm.
there was a video of Florida's deadliest plant.
Oh, really? So it's in Florida now, huh? Well, if you see the pretty little beads, just leave them alone. That would be my recommendation. Has anybody ever heard of ordeal poisons?
What?
Ordeal poisons? This was an idea that some people had many, many ages ago, that if you had someone who was convicted of a crime, okay, we're going to put him on trial. And rather than actually collect evidence and have lawyers, we're going to give him a poisoned bean. And if he eats it and he survives, well, he's innocent. If he eats it and he dies, well, he's guilty. The interesting thing is that sometimes it worked, which is baffling until you understand how the ordeal bean poisons worked. They required the oils inside the beans to be exposed so they could be ingested. So if you were innocent and you felt confident in your innocence, you might bite it once and then just swallow it down. Yep, I'm good. And what would most likely happen is that very little of the poison would get into your system and it would pass through. If you were really guilty and you knew it, you're going to prolong things. You're going to nibble that bean and ultimately expose yourself to more and more of the toxin. So I'm not saying it always worked, but there were times when innocent people actually did survive. And that was really why. Not because that's a good way to determine innocence or guilt, but, and there were other kinds of things other than beans that were also used, but ingesting poison in some cultures was a way of proving innocence or guilt. Again, not something I would recommend. Then we have plants that are not necessarily poisonous. They're not necessarily mean in terms of being thorny and all of that. But when brought to a place they don't belong, they misbehave. They're highly invasive. Kudzu. You know, the minute its roots touch the ground, it takes over and nothing's gonna kill it. You'll be ripping that up forever. And that's a plant that was simply brought in by well-meaning people, and they brought it into a place where it had no competition, no predators of any kind, and it just took off. Similar things that we have here in New York State that are a big problem is pampas grass. You see commonly along the roadsides, it's those big feathery plumes. That's what it's doing, it's crowding out the native vegetation, and it does not provide the kind of habitat that the fauna need. So it's depriving a whole ecosystem of the proper food source and the proper protections, and it's crowding out things that should be there. Purple loosestrife, which is really pretty, and you see the big fields of it, and wow, it's a beautiful field of purple. Horribly, horribly invasive, and really hard to get rid of. People will pull it out, people have tried burning it, but it can just release seeds into the air, and then it spreads further. So that's a really tough one. There's certain forms of water plants that likewise, they choke out the natural vegetation, and it's a problem. And really, again, that goes back to being a responsible gardener and understanding the plants you're buying, understanding what's native, what's not native, what's invasive, what's not invasive. I tell people if you're gonna plant mint, keep it in a pot. Just don't let its roots touch the ground. You can grow it in a pot all day long, no problem. But if you put mint in the ground, you're gonna have a yard full of mint. My husband remembers mowing, he remembers the smell of mint as mown grass, because his mother planted mint in the garden, and there was so much mint in the lawn that when he mowed the lawn, he thought, oh, that's just the smell of grass and weeds. Nope, it's the smell of mint that becomes a weed very quickly. And that's true of anything in the mint family. It could be peppermint, spearmint, pineapple mint, catnip. Catnip is in the mint family.
King Jenny and ground ivy as well.
Yep.
In that family.
Yeah.
Some herbs are like that too, like tansies like that. Even horseradish can go crazy if you mow. And comfrey, you can keep spreading it if you don't like contain it somehow, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of plants that need to be contained. One of the things about yew, and I mean yew isn't so bad around here, but yew is a plant that constantly dies and is reborn. It's why it got the reputation it does as the graveyard tree, is because as yew grows, branches of yew will grow down. They will actually form new young tree, but it's really connected to this much older tree, maybe half a mile away, depending on whether or not it's been allowed free rein to grow. Black locust is the same way. Black locust, you can cut a black locust down to the ground, you can grind the stump, and you'll still get little baby locusts from that same root system. They're very
Aspens do
persistent.
that.
We have birch,
Aspens.
our birch
Aspens
trees
walk
will do
across
that.
your yard.
Yeah,
Even
Yeah.
white birch. The white birch does that where I live.
really?
Oh,
I
yeah.
haven't seen that
I
with
can
birch.
log it, and then it has underground, wherever there's an underground root, it can
Mhm.
send up another,
That's
send
interesting.
another tree.
I haven't seen that with birch.
Oh yeah, as long as you don't actually, turn the soil over and pull all the roots out,
Okay.
it can grow a whole new tree.
Silver
Yeah.
maples are, we had one in the yard,
Mhm.
and come summer, you saw tons of little babies around it.
Well, with maples, that really could be the seeds,
Mm.
because maple seeds are very quick to sprout.
But we
Those-
never saw any seeds,
The helicopters?
never with the silver maple.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Because I know that they reseed very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Oak trees. I love oak trees. I have 14 oak trees on 1/3 of an acre, and I love every one of them. But in the fall, I know I have to get those acorns up, because those acorns will split, and you'll look and you'll see, oh, there's an acorn on the ground. There's already a 2-inch taproot underneath that acorn, long before you see anything grow vertically. It's really amazing. Yeah.
And let's not get some of our more fun weeds like hops. They all fall in the same category.
That's true. But I think that most people now would see an invasive hop vine as a happy thing.
Not when it grows a foot a day.
Well, that's true. Well, you just have to make that much more beer. You got to keep up with it. But yes, hops are very fast growing. They're right up there with vine form honeysuckle, where if you stand still too long, it's going to grow right up over you. I mean, these are plants that grow amazingly fast. I mean, I know the idea of sitting there and watching a plant grow is ludicrous to most of us, but in all honesty, some of these plants really do grow that fast. It's incredible how quickly they grow. Well, I had an argument with a landscape architect on one of my projects because he put sumac in a courtyard. And I keep calling it the magic sumac because the landscape architects I talk to keep saying, no, Gretchen, it's a new dwarf form. It doesn't spread, it doesn't grow. I'm like, it's sumac. I'm sorry. You can't make a plant so contrary to its own nature. And sure enough, these little rosy glow sumacs that were only supposed to get yay tall and never go anywhere have taken over the courtyard. And they had to pull a bunch of them out. So just because nurseries are trying to develop this new cultivar and this new clone, plants will revert to their nature. In fact, you will see on some hybrid tea roses, which we don't really grow too much here because they're very fussy and not really hardy. What happens up here that may or may not happen down in New Jersey is that most hybrid teas, their natural rootstock is very weak, so they're grafted. So the plant you see from the ground up is a completely different plant from the one below it. And if the plant dies back, the wild rose that was the rootstock will take over, and those wild roses grow crazy. And they have tiny little flowers, they're not as showy, and they just go wild and take over. So those are things to be aware of. And then there's another aspect of plants misbehaving, and it's not their fault. And we blame them, though. How many people would love to declare war on ragweed? Yeah, it's not their fault. They're just reproducing. It's what they do.
They're having sex in your nose.
They're having sex in your nose, yeah. But there are an increasing number of plants that people are developing allergies to. And ragweed is one that people have been allergic to for a very long time. It's a very common allergen. And what's really unfortunate is that the really showy flowers get a bad reputation because people will say, oh, I can't have those flowers, I'm allergic to pollen. A little known fact, the showier the flower, the less likely its pollen is going to bother you. If a plant is putting all that time and effort into creating a flower, it's doing it for a reason. And the reason is it wants a bee or a bird to come and say hi so that it can transfer its pollen to the next flower.
Not airborne.
It's the ones like ragweed and the grasses
Trees.
and the trees that don't have flowers. Those are the ones that most of us are reacting to because those are the airborne pollens. So when you see a pretty garden and you're like, oh, I can't go near it, I have allergies, you know what? You're having more problems from the lawn next to it than you are from the showy garden. I mean, yes, if you have allergies, you may not want to go and lean in real deep and inhale, but those pollen spores are not airborne. So that's an interesting fact about that. I'm trying to think, I think I covered everything I really wanted to go over, because I mean, aside from reading through this whole book, which would be fascinating, but would take a really long time, does anyone have any questions or thoughts about the darker side of the plant world? Yes?
Pennyroyal, is that at all hallucinogenic or poisonous?
I don't know that I've read that one. Let me look and see if I have it in here.
I know you're not supposed to touch it if you are pregnant.
I read a reference to it being hallucinogenic, but I've never seen it anywhere else. But
Do you know what the Latin name of it is,
Not
by
a
any
clue.
chance?
For what? I didn't hear.
Pennyroyal.
Pennyroyal?
Pennyroyal?
Pennyroyal.
Pennyroyal. Well, it's not hardy here. It wouldn't winter over, so it wouldn't be naturally growing around
I'm just
the area.
wondering
But
because
I
it was
know
part of
that
a- it
you
was part
can,
of a sacred
you're right,
ritual.
you have to totally avoid anything you do with it when you're
Yeah.
pregnant.
But it was part of a sacred
I don't know
ritual
about-
piece
I don't
in
know
Calder
about
Rock. and
I've
says
grown
it's
it just in a
hallucinogenic, but
pot.
It's the only place I've ever seen that.
Yeah, no, I don't see it listed here, and I'm not particularly familiar with it myself. I would like
Mushrooms?
to,
It is a mint.
yeah, I
Yeah, it's in the
I
mint
was-
family.
Okay.
See what comes out.
Well, there are some plants that the reason why pregnant women can't do it, it's not that they're toxic, but they have abortifactants. So it's something where the substance is harmless to most people, but it can cause an abortion. So that can be that may be why pennyroyal would not be recommended.
It's irritating to the uterus. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
I
Throw you
think-
into labor.
I think rue is in the
Oh,
same
Rue is another
bad for
one, yeah.
everybody.
So,
Glue is bad for everyone, so.
yeah,
Peppermint.
Gretchen,
yeah.
mentha purultian?
Mentha, so that's one of the mints? Oh, okay, so it is in the mint family. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because my mother
Oh,
miscarried
yeah,
from drinking
yeah,
peppermint.
yeah.
Really?
Which is the reason I exist. I was the quick catch-up club. They were going for a girl. Not a half right.
Something else that might be of interest if you guys are interested in poisonous plants and things like that, there are poison gardens that you can go visit. Alnwick Poison Gardens is in Northumberland, England. And fans of the Harry Potter movies will recognize the medieval Alnwick Castle, which served as Hogwarts in the first two films. So you can go and visit that one. The world's oldest university, Botanical Gardens, is situated near Venice in Padova, Italy, and it's called the Botanical Garden of Padua. The Chelsea Physic Garden, that's located in London. Montreal has a world-class botanical garden that includes a small fenced toxic plant garden and a medicinal garden. And realistically, I gotta tell you, medicinal gardens, look at them as toxic gardens because there's a fine line, especially when you're dealing with the actual natural plants between medicine and poison. There's also the Mutter Museum, that's the College of Physicians of Philadelphia has a
There's
museum.
some funky stuff there.
Yeah. W.C. Muncher Poisonous Plants Garden at Cornell University, which I don't remember actually seeing. I'm gonna have to go visit Cornell again and take a look there. It was before this interest developed. But basically, there are plants out there that are beautiful and wonderful and beneficial, but we have to respect them. And we have to realize that not every plant wants to be our friend. And if you don't know exactly what you're eating, don't.
Don't eat it.
Don't eat it. I did scare, I will say, one of my site reps and I were at Rockport University and there's a mulberry tree. And we both knew 100% they were mulberries. We know they're safe. He and I are standing there and we're just munching on them. And this kid came by, he's like, oh my God, you guys are gonna die. It's like, no, we're not gonna die, we know what we're eating. Yeah, poison berries. No, they're not poison berries, they're mulberries, they're perfectly safe. Mulberries, that's gotta be poisonous. I know I've heard that somewhere. No, we're fine. But, you know, we kind of toyed with the idea of pretending that we were about to, yeah. We toyed with that idea, we didn't do it because we didn't want to scare the kid and entirely and have the ambulance called by mistake since everyone has a cell phone now, but no, you just need to make sure that you know what you're doing and just be careful. And if anybody wants to come up and take a closer look at our friend here, Rob did leave gardening gloves, so you can.
We plant those rugoses because they actually live for.
Well, and it is interesting that you say that.
3 or 4. Are you zone 3?
We had a teenager rushed into the ICU
Zone 6.
because he went out and
I won't
ate
plant
a
anything
mushroom
that is
that he thought was hallucinogenic in the woods.
I mean, I'll.
About 4.
I plant 5 just to be safe.
So
I
we
went
managed
4
to save his
sunsets.
life, but he damn near died. It got real close, you know. Kids, you know, they don't know anything else. He was only like 14 or something, you know.
Yeah, mushrooms are especially
Yeah,
bad.
it was amazing. I was very lucky they didn't die.
Yeah, I had thought about going into the mushrooms, but I figured I'd stay with the Planet Kingdom. I only dipped into that with the ergo, but.
I've taken like 3 classes and I'm still afraid to pick them up.
There's
I'm
even
so
people-
paranoid, you
even
know.